Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today to discuss a very hot topic these days, which is PV manufacturing trends in India. The event is organized by JMK Research, a specialist market research and consulting firm focusing on renewables and e-mobility segments in India. The session is supported by Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, a leading think tank that examines issues related to energy markets, trends, and policies globally. So some of the key points that we want to discuss today are understanding the current PV manufacturing landscape in India, impact of PLI scheme on the sector, what are the issues and challenges that are currently faced by manufacturers, and to address those concerns, what kind of policy interventions are needed, what is the financing trends in the manufacturing sector right now, and way forward for the sector. And now to take on this discussion today, we have a very interesting mix of industry experts with us today. A quick intro of our experts here. We have Mr. Vivek Srivastav, Group CEO, Waaree Energies. We have Mr. Vineet Mittal, Co-founder, Director, Navitas Green Solutions in Renault India. Mr. Sunil Verma, Senior Director, Centrum Capital Limited. And Ms. Vibhuti Garg, Director, South Asia, IFA. Thank you to all the panelists to be part of this discussion today. We would first like to start with a small presentation, which Vibhuti will present and which will share the context for our discussion today, which will talk about some slides on the sector and insights that are there. Over to you, Vibhuti.
Thanks, Jyoti. If you can put the slides, yes.
I'm just sharing.
So in the meantime, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today and talking to the esteemed panelists as well as us with such an esteemed audience. Today, I will present some of the findings from our report, which we've done along with JMK Research, which is on the PV manufacturing trends in India. Just to set the context, before we start talking about where we are in terms of PV manufacturing, I would say why it is critical, because as we all know, India has set up a huge renewable energy target of 450 gigawatt by 2030, which means if we look at the upstream, there is huge requirement from solar modules to cells, wafer, ingots to even polysilicon. So far, what the trend has been that India has largely been relying on import to meet its needs. But since COVID hit us and to ensure, the government has taken different stance in terms of, to ensure energy security. So government has actually now been given a big push to domestic manufacturing so as to reduce reliance on imports, but also more importantly, to meet other social objectives like creating more jobs as well as economic development within the country. Now, India can position itself as an export hub after China for supply of these critical minerals for RE development. If you will look at way the whole global economy is working, China has been one of the biggest with more than 90% of supplies for most of these upstream products coming from China alone. So therefore, it becomes very, very eminent that countries like India needs to enhance domestic manufacturing capacity, also export to other countries. Now coming to this slide, how the capacity trend has changed. So the government put in place, the Indian government had imposed, several tariff barriers like BCD or even non-tariff barriers like ALMM or even the domestic content requirement to reduce reliance on imports. In addition, the government included solar PV manufacturing in its production-linked incentive scheme with a total outlay of about US dollars 3.2 billion or 195 billion Indian rupees spread over 2 tranches. Now, with this favorable policy environment, what we have seen as well is that the capacity growth has, at least for the modules as well as cell, more than doubled in the last 2 to 3 years. So while the operational capacities for both cells and modules is between 50 to 60%, but we have seen an exponential growth in both because primarily of some of the policy support that the government has provided. Now we have seen that as far as the nameplate capacity of modules is concerned, we have come from 18 gigawatt in March 2022 to 38 gigawatt in March 2023, and cells from 4.3 gigawatt to 6.6 gigawatt. So as we said, while we have seen progress happening in modules and the cell space, but what we are still lacking is to build more ingot and wafers and polysilicon within India. There have been some positive improvements or positive announcement like Adani Solar now entering in the ingot wafer space, but polysilicon is still, I would say, a territory which has not been explored much, but there are big developments happening even in these two sectors as well, and we'll see huge capacity growing up. So by 2026, we expect it will likely reach 110 gigawatts. Next slide. Now in 2020, the Indian government, as I did mention, one of the big drivers for this whole capacity coming up is the introduction of the PLI scheme, which has a total outlay of 45 billion in tranche 1, which was later enhanced to 195 billion in tranche 2 in the union budget in 2022. So the two tranches of the PLI scheme has helped to add about 51.6 gigawatt of module capacity and at least 27.4 gigawatt of integrated polysilicon to module capacity in India, which will be developed in the next 2 to 3 years. So while domestic content requirement or imposition of safeguard duties or BCD did act as a catalyst, but the real driver has been the PLI scheme, which has led to entry of new players which were not there earlier, and moreover, adoption of new and improved technologies as well. The key players, in tranche 1 who won the bids were Shirdi Sai Electricals, Adani, as well as Reliance, whereas in the tranche 2, there were many more new players, and there were about 11 players who kind of won this tranche 2 bid. Next slide. While we did mention some of the players, but if you look at the key players, then the top 10 domestic manufacturer contributes about 72.3% of this capacity which has been developed so far. And as of March 2023, Waaree, with a capacity of 9 gigawatt of existing capacity and 3 gigawatt of proposed capacity, is the largest module manufacturer in India. Vikram Solar, then we have Shirdi Sai Electrical, Reliance, which have big plans and huge capacities are gonna be coming up in the next 3 to 4 years. However, for all these players, most of them, the production is for own use to meet their own requirements of setting up huge RE capacity. Whereas First Solar is the only US-based manufacturer which is setting up capacity and majorly from the export objective perspective. And in terms of state, we did see Gujarat alone accounts for nearly 57% of all the forthcoming PV manufacturing capacity, followed by Telangana, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu. Next slide. Now, the key trends that have emerged in the last 2 years alone, the PLI scheme led to, as I did mention earlier as well, many new players like Reliance, Renew, are some of the new entrants which are exploring this space. And other players such as Avada, Amp Energy have also announced big plans to enter the domestic PV manufacturing landscape in the past 2 years. And increasingly, the trend is for all the new entrants to set up integrated PV manufacturing at scale. So that's the change from just being a module manufacturer to, an integrated capacity being set up. In terms of technology, again, there is a shift and it's evolving at a much faster pace. So from polycrystalline, which was the mainstay just a few years back, has become already obsolete. And what we are now seeing is monocrystalline. This technology also highlights the need for manufacturers to, establish carefully while designing their PV lines to accommodate all new technologies that are being developed. Now, increasingly, there is a shift to future technologies, which is kind of dominated by heterojunction technology, the HJT, or the tunnel oxide passivated contact, which is the TOPCon. And if you'll see, the new players are largely both in either in the TOPCon or HJT. We did speak about ALMM, which the MNRE introduced in 2019, basically with the objective to ensure more quality standardization and lower the industry's dependence on imported solar. In February 2023, it has included many more companies, but at the same time, there are some challenges. The existing players don't have or lack the higher wattage modules or the better technologies, which kind of has restricted some of the deployment of renewable energy, especially the utility scale projects at a large scale. While the government has extended the timeline and now by a year, so it's until March 2024 only when this will be applicable, but this gap is something which needs to be filled, and more players needs to enter and set up capacities in India. Next slide. Coming to my last slide in terms of way forward. So clearly, India is not only meeting its own requirement, but also has exported, and we have seen exports rising by almost 5x in financial year 2023 compared to financial year 2022. And this was largely because of the lot of sanctions which various countries had put on China imports, given there was huge reliance on China. So going forward, the Indian manufacturers should looking at not only meeting their own domestic needs, but also becoming an export hub to meet the increasing RE deployment across the globe. Secondly, last few years, especially after COVID from 2020 till early 2023, we have seen component prices, especially for PV and even for polysilicon, especially, have led to a surge in prices of RE. This unprecedented hike in polysilicon costs has had a domino effect by increasing the prices of all the downstream components, which as a result, we have also seen the RE tariff prices, which came to as low as 2 rupees per kilowatt hour in December 2020, but now the prices have gone up largely because of high input prices. Now with the polysilicon capacity, which has almost doubled in the next few years, there's a huge capacity being set up. So that will address some of the issues on the supply side, and the prices are expected to stabilize. So which looks to be much more promising, and we'll see again a downward trajectory in RE prices. Ancillary market development becomes again very, very critical. So while from cell and module, we have gone upstream to looking at boosting of more capacities at polysilicon as well as wafers and ingots. But ancillary service market also needs to be developed in tandem, and we need to have a very integrated approach and develop the entire ecosystem. So developing of ancillary service market becomes critical, and the government can consider some of the policy, I would say, levers like extension of PLI scheme to even the ancillary products as well, and also consider maybe providing tax credit similar to the ones which we saw being implemented in the Inflation Reduction Act. Lastly, I would say, given the PV manufacturing facility is very, very capital intensive and requires huge technology changes that we are witnessing. So government needs to play an active role and provide subsidy payment on time. And also consider reducing, electricity prices like what we are seeing in China. That's also one of the big levers that the Chinese government has provided to its developers. With this, I will now hand it back to Jyoti, and I will look forward to hearing more perspective we have in the industry experts in the room today. So over to you, Jyoti, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Vibhuti, for the wonderful presentation. We will start our panel discussion. I will request my audience also, if they have any questions, they can put up those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of this window, webinar window you can see, and our panelists will try to answer them live, some of them, if possible. Now coming on to the discussion, what Vibhuti has mentioned, not many things, but let's hear it from the experts. So, Mr. Vivek, we want to, know from you. Waaree is one of the oldest and biggest player in solar PV manufacturing space. How you have seen this market has evolved over these years, and what is, after PLI, what is the impact overall that you are seeing in the market?
Thank you. Good afternoon, co-panelists, such an ensemble of people and the audience. Jyoti, if I look at how the market has evolved, it has actually evolved to the way the overall market on renewable has evolved. Okay, so there is, obviously it has to do that. And we have to, looking at the Indian manufacturing sector, one has to be conscious. Today, we are in a regime where there is certainty, but even till last year, Indian manufacturers were only getting 5% of the market for reasons you know best. 95% of the market was not with the Indian manufacturers, and it is hats off to the resilience of manufacturers who kept investing in technology, kept investing, hoping, and also made plans for this phase. Rome was never built in a day, but if you look at the kind of ramp up that has happened, the entire capacity addition which happened over 14 years, more than that happened in 1 year. So that just tells you the ability of the domestic manufacturing sector to ramp up with even just a flicker of policy, favorable policy and the ecosystem in place. So I think that's the best example of the resoluteness of the industry. The second part, when you talk about PLI, I think PLI in the short term, it's like, I always say PLI, unlike capital subsidy, is a menu card where you have a very good menu. And you, in fact, for the PLI, to look at the menu card also, you have to pay a lot for it. It's not an export subsidy. And while in the short term, it boosts sentiment and certainty. And in the long term, it also provides a clear forward path for addition because there is a time-bound mechanism in which it has to be done. However, I would like to go beyond the PLI part of it because manufacturing anywhere in the world, and I'm not talking about solar PV modules, if you look at the growth of manufacturing, if it has to be in an organized manner, be it steel, cement, anywhere in the world, it is always a triangle. The triangle is, the first apex of it is assured demand, which you can say anchor demand or whatever, domestic demand, etc. The second part is SOPs, whether it is PLI, whether it is subsidies, operational subsidies, financial enablement, etc. And the third is deterrence. Call it by whatever name. There has to be a level of deterrence while there is an infancy period or a consolidation period. I'm not in favor of having deterrences as a lifetime because the industry has to become self-sufficient. But in the phase of infancy, it is required. So these three have to move together. PLI is one component of one part of the one apex of the triangle, which is the part of the SOPs. But if you look at globally, now US is a good example of IRA. We were till now referring only to China. What Europe is coming out, and then when we compare, so PLI, as I said, is a very good progressive step. But if I look at the overall ecosystem and the support that is required, it is an important but not a very big component of it. And we can deliberate on that later on. The prospect of the industry obviously is great. We all know that, which the report highlights. In fact, I don't need to report the figures and the very crisp and wonderful summary that Vibhuti put out.
Thank you, Vivek, sir. So I have another follow-up question to that. You're saying there has to be a demand. So we have recently seen, ministry has come up with a 50 gigawatt bidding trajectory for RE projects year-on-year basis. And out of that, we think about 35 gigawatt will come from solar itself. So do you think domestic manufacturers will be able to meet that demand? Plus, they will be able to, also go for exports market, supply to exports market also.
I think numbers say the story. Whatever was put out in the presentation, ramping up to 110 gigawatt, I feel it's a conservative number. As I said, demand. And when I say this, I always say, there's a very good saying in Hindi which says, "Pratyaksh ko praman ki avashyakta nahi hai." You don't require proof for what is already happening. If the ramp up can be to that extent without any support in such a short time, no negative words, with the kind of leadership we have seen from several players, there is no reason to believe that. I think what is happening in this debate of being able to service that demand, we are forgetting two things. First of all, this demand is what the government is projecting. And I think we need to move away from what the government is projecting. The industry has to play a role. If we are looking at green hydrogen, just 1 metric ton, and if our goal is 5 metric ton, itself is, I think it would be in the range of 20 to 25 gigawatts for 1 metric ton of hydrogen, and green ammonia about 5 to 7. If we factor in all that, the demand is definitely much, much higher. So that's the demand side. Now, to service that demand, it is very simple. Where is the deployment? So one is that there is a lead that is getting created. So today, if we look at it, I mean, your report also, if you read some of the JMK report, in terms of what is getting commissioned, the lag period between when these were tendered out. So there are projects of 3 to 4 years old that are not happening. There are some structural issues that need to be looked at. And it's a learning from other markets, the way the PPAs are tendered out with inflexibility, and rightly so, and the lowest rate. Those projects, the viability of them is an issue rather than the deployment due to modules. Last year, Vibhuti just put out that slide which said 38 gigawatt, out of which if you knock out 11 gigawatt, 27 gigawatt is high power. Even if I take away captive and export of 2.5 and 3.5, 21 gigawatt of nameplate capacity is available. And the manufacturers are having to operate, I can see Vineet expressing concern at 30-40% capacity. And solar modules, we all know, look at Jinko, Longi and all that, 90% is achievable. So the answer lies in the fact that if there is actual deployment that is happening on the ground, devoid of conditions like connectivity, the great busted, Indian busted issue, 6-7 issues that today is not the forum to talk about, I think availability is not a constraint. We have just gone behind the easier aspects of saying this is what is not there, but the numbers don't say. And if it is 38 gigawatt, 27 gigawatt as on March, look at the deployment last year with 20 gigawatt of modules imported into the country last fiscal, and just 12 gigawatt getting deployed. That tells the story rather than having anything else to say.
Right, Vivek, sir. I have a very relevant question from the audience, which is in continuation to what you were saying. After the PLI is, expires and the BCD is gone, do you think Indian manufacturers will be able to compete with China? Isn't it tough considering that China is still controlling, over the basic raw material that Indian manufacturers are using?
Thank you. Very pertinent question. And I did hint at in that there is a stage of consolidation and infancy period that is required. I have a very firm belief, and I can talk about it in detail. A 4-year span for consolidation is good enough. The world is not that unipolar as it looks like. Yes, today China has in ingots 97%, in another 83, 77. Those are high numbers. But the world has realized if I can say, the downside of that, the COVID and lots of other issues have brought out, there is no decoupling that's going to happen. I'm just slightly deviating. The word decoupling is dangerous, but de-risking and a wider span of, if I can say, the right word to put is deployment. If I look at it today, we are not even at 5% of where the global deployment is going to be. There is no way a country can alone suffice. As far as competitiveness is concerned, it's a learning curve. I know I can quote from Vari's example that today, like to like in module assembly, we can say we are very competitive. But when we go back to the raw materials, sorry, when we go back to the value chain, it will take 2 to 3 years time. And then, as I said, when Vibhuti put out a couple of enabling things which are not in the hands of manufacturers, cost of electricity, cost of few other things, those combined together, I don't see a major concern in India. The question that will India be able to compete with the Chinese? First of all, is there going to be a competition? That's something we can debate. Second is there a space for everyone? The answer is yes. Are Indian manufacturers going to be competitive, viable with high quality product? I have a very firm belief in that. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that optimism. Vineet, my next question is for you actually. So, specifically from a raw material perspective, we have seen in the past also, there are some fluctuation in prices and Indian manufacturers are not able to manage the prices. They are still dependent on raw materials. So they're still not competitive. So do you think there is some combat mechanism that manufacturers can have, or can, in next few years time frame, they can look out and, be competitive, at least on the terms of pricing and technology?
Thank you, Jyoti, and the, and the panel here. Just one last thing to add in the previous question, if I can add one small point here,
Sure.
about the competitiveness for Indian manufacturers after BCD and after PLI. Both the things are very new. I mean, we are thinking 5 years ahead, but if we go back 1 year behind, there was no PLI, there was no BCD, and still the manufacturers were growing at whatever pace be it, but they were growing because they were competitive. So in that sense, when there is going to be enough scale in the market, and with or without any sort of incentives, the market will still adapt. The manufacturers will definitely be able to compete in the market. It's not going to be dependent only on any external subsidies. But when we also talk about expiry of the certain PLI or the BCD, we also need to look at the current incentives that the Chinese government is offering to their manufacturers. So then we are in a true sense comparing our competitiveness with theirs. So in that sense, if the government there is continuing any sort of support programs or incentives to the Chinese manufacturers or exporters, at least to that level, Indian government will continue doing that. That is our thought process, because even now, and then we keep talking about competitiveness for solar or semiconductor industry in that sense. But when you talk about steel, when you talk about automobiles, when you talk about textiles, they are like 100-year-old industries, 200-year-old industries, and there's still so many different forms of subsidies or incentives. Those are necessary for any form of industry to continue growing, and they come back to the government in various forms, in taxation, GST or income tax or whatever. So in that sense, government is incentivizing, but the overall impact is not really too much. Talking to your point of raw material price fluctuations and then the competitiveness, again, point being, it's not about India is not competitive anymore. It is competitive, definitely. That is why we have been able to export to various countries outside of the India as well, where China is directly exporting. So in that sense, we're competing with them directly to a country where there is no restrictions against China. There are so many such examples that we have. And within India as well, we all know about modules being imported through the FTA route in India, and during post BCD and during the safeguard duty as well. So, already with fluctuations in raw material prices, but still, keeping the customer and the manufacturer together, there is possibility to enter into long-term agreements and then make sure that these prices are in a way kept stable on at least project level. So there has to be a kind of very close relationship between the customer and buyer, and understand the global volatility for various reasons. So, and then of course, try to indigenize as much as possible. So taking an example, we have started about EV manufacturing and supplying to the market as well. And the raw material doesn't come from China, it comes from Korea. So in that sense, we are not only talking about competition from China, but collaborating with different parts of the world, and then making sure we are able to locally produce stuff which is in a way making us more sustainable and lesser dependent on the volatilities. So, I mean, the whole answer to it will be to develop the ecosystem as much as possible.
In terms of technology, Vineet, what is your say? We are seeing that Chinese players, they are advancing up with very new kind of technologies. How are Indian players going to, match that? And also there is a demand from project developers also for those kind of higher efficiency modules now?
So market will continuously evolve. Customers will always be looking for better efficiency, lesser space modules with higher reliability and tenure of the life of the module. So that is a continuous improvement that's needed in almost again all sectors, including solar. So definitely Chinese advancement in technology is like top of the mark, and the world is generally following what is being happening there. So in that sense, honestly, we need to work a lot on the R&D space. We keep talking about it in all the forums, but the space at which they are growing and the headwind they have, the kind of gap they have in terms of the development of technology, it is truly remarkable. We have to accept that. Having said that, there have been many instances of indigenizing the processes, if not the whole technology, so that at least to that level we are competitive. And definitely the developers ask for latest efficiency modules. It started with Poly a few years back, came up to Mono, then Monoperk. Recently, a lot of shipments happening in the top one. And then
But are there players, Vineet, who have already started some bit of R&D? Vivek, sir, to you also, has Waaree started R&D?
This is an industry where if the answer is not in affirmative, you're already a dinosaur. Okay. So whether it is R&D, keeping track, working with research institutions, collaborating, all that is part. So the key element here is, as Vineet was mentioning, there is a curve that gets followed. So what is put out by the leading manufacturers who control 80% of the market gets followed because the ancillary industry, the backward integration happens like that. The second part of it is also to do with the fact that it is a material science, and progress in that area is very rapid. So we have players now, while we are all talking about HJT, TOPCon, N-type, etc. This is what is in the real domain. What will come after 5 years is something, whether it's perovskites and things like that. So all the manufacturers at different levels, whether they are collaborating, whether they are keeping track, whether they are investing, whether they are experimenting. Way back when HJT was an unknown phenomena, Waaree, for example, was manufacturing by getting HJT cells, working on them from Russia, etc. So this is an integral part of the business. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
yes.
Vineet. So my next question for you specifically now is on the ancillary component industry. Navitas also has a backsheet facility. So, how you're seeing things that are evolving, what trends you're seeing evolving in this specific sector. And you can talk about some of the components.
So basically we are making EVA, we're not making the backseat as of now, the encapsulants. There's a lot of changes. I mean, again, as the material science, what Vivek Sam talked about. Ethyl acetate is the standard product that is being manufactured globally. It comes from the EVA resin that is, as of now, not manufactured in India. It's again a polymer product. But there have been developments from the time when bifacial has picked up pace. So encapsulants have been evolved, or there have been developments in the different forms of encapsulants. So there are new encapsulants like POE, polyolefin, or there is a EPE. So there is a co-extruded EVA, which was earlier a 3-layer, single layer. Now it is a POE layer in between the EVA on both sides. And there has been a lot of different thought process around it. EVA with the EPE, or the EVA with the POE, or there is going to be POE on both sides, or the EPE on both sides, or EVA on both sides. So there have been different thought processes by different manufacturers. Everyone has done their own internal testings, short term, long term. There will be a lot of lab reports around this. People have been experimenting what is going to be better for the bifacial. And when you talk about bifacial, again, it is whether it is dual glass or glass with a transparent backseat. So it's a different component altogether, where the backseat, which was used to be white, it is in many cases converted into a glass on the right side, or to keep the panel weight similar to a regular module, a backsheet which is transparent in nature, so that the reflection can still be absorbed on the backside of the modules. So there has been these different evolvements in the market, depending on the installation site, depending on the structure and the trackers availability at the site, and what is the thought process behind that from the developer side. Also to do with the hailstorms in different regions. So dual glass have seen different results when there is a hailstorm on the site, and there is a dual glass versus a glass backsheet module. When there is a glass.
But do we have enough capacity supply of, these components indigenously for the module capacities that are planned in India?
He is not yet manufactured in India, but this is a very recent phenomena. So, I mean, capacities will develop once the market stabilizes what is going to sustain in the long run. So, until now, almost 20-30 years, it was the EVA which was being utilized. And we have enough EVA capacity now in India. We have about 8 or 10 manufacturers all put together can sufficiently provide for the module manufacturing that is as of now in the market, plus what is going to be planned with the current expansion of module manufacturing. So to that level, the manufacturing is available, but the new age and then POE is a different recipe, but the equipment remains the same. The equipment changes when there is EPE requirement. So the same EVA machine will make the POE layer, and then the additional ancillaries to make the EPE out of this. So in that sense, it is going to be a learning curve again for the manufacturers. There have been 1 or 2 manufacturers who have recently started working on the EPE within India as well. We are also doing our own trials, and it's a test part. We have to get our internal trials, field trials, customer acceptance on the site. So it is going to take some time. But before that, it is a question of which technology will remain. What is the thought process overall from the manufacturer's front that they are looking to manufacture in the coming 3 years, 4 years?
What about glass, Vineet? I think only one player has the monopoly.
But I think Adani's group company Visakha is also, I think, starting or near to start. And then we have 2 more companies who are also in the last couple of quarters of developing their own glass facility. So a furnace setup itself is a 1.5-2 year process. And then once you start a new glass line or furnace, it has to run for 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. So that's the kind of continuous process plant it is. But there have been a lot of developments in the glass manufacturing. I think even larger players like Vali and Vikram are planning their own, or maybe tying up with existing larger glass manufacturers in the other sector, and then working together to make solar glass. So again, these are all parallel developments. By the time this next phase of manufacturing will come online next 3 years, 4 years. Parallelly, I'm pretty sure that the entire ecosystem, glass, EVA, backsheet, frame, will also develop parallelly, because it's an ecosystem. If the end demand is there will be players who will set up independent units. All the manufacturers themselves will go backward and look at the ancillary manufacturing.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for those insights. Let's hear it from Mr. Sunil now. Sunil, you have heard from the PV manufacturers here, and Centrum being, a key player who's involved in the financing part of this sector. So from you, I want to understand, what is the financing perspective? Give us some bit of a financing perspective in this sector. And if you can highlight some risks and concerns from an investor perspective for this sector.
Sure. Thank you, Jyoti. It's a very interesting, insights are shared by Vivek and Vineet. I would like to add in terms of our own views on the financing. Coming to the debt financing initially, largely the needs of the industry were taken care of by IREDA with some support from other banks. for the manufacturers, for the solar manufacturers. However, now the scale has multiplied, the amount of capex that is required in the last few years versus what is it going to be is manifold. I guess it is more than 10 times or something, the capex that would be happening now, or more than that. Hence, there is a need to diversify the base of the lenders. It's not just IREDA, and banks, of course, would have concerns. The traditional PSU banks would have concerns because this is not a business like that PV business where you have steady cash flows. It's a business that has historically has witnessed volatility both in the sale price as well as in the raw material costs, and some of them are not in the control. They're controlled by Chinese, etc. And hence, if somebody is funding a large project and if they want to see the track record of the sector, then there are challenges. And hence, definitely, if you want to ensure smooth financing for all of the projects that are mentioned, we're talking about 100 gigawatt, etc. In terms of the manufacturing capacity, government also has to play a role in terms of enabling this, which it has done until now through the funding from IREDA. More than 50% of the funding in the sector is taken care of until now by IREDA. And going forward, we need more institutions that support the debt financing. Now, coming to the equity, many players are aspiring for equity financing. We were involved in a few of the deals. Waaree has done a very large equity rise quite recently. However, the kind of equity financing that the sector requires is tremendous. The large players, of course, the likes of Reliance, etc., who have a deep pocket, they've also raised some money, but there are so many other players who are mid-level players who are planning to set up significant capacities. We generally are in touch with investors, and we hear their perceptions of the risk in the sector. And it comes, there are multiple risks that they perceive. And for those who are very learned and who have been closely following the sector, now they feel that there's a risk in the execution of the projects. There is an optimism around the demand in the sector, not only because of the government's initiative, the 50 gigawatt bidding, etc., but also because there's a large captive consumption that the groups like Reliance, Adani, and Tata would have, and hence, and of course, there's a growing export market, and hence demand probably is not a concern for the equity investors, private equity funds, etc. The demand is not a significant concern like in the past. However, the concerns are more on execution of these projects. It requires when somebody is backward integrating to areas, until now India largely had a module capacity. There are very few cell players. Cell technology is one step ahead, but the wafer and polysilicon, they're much more complex. So in terms of right from the procurement of the equipment, right from getting the right manpower, there is a challenge. And somebody was mentioning in the questions that Chinese restrictions on transfer of wafer technology that was proposed by the Chinese government, probably it is not taken place. But if such restrictions are put in place, then going forward, then there will be some challenge, because most of the technology, the equipment suppliers in these two, in the wafer and polysilicon, it is China where they are based, not any other place, and hence such restrictions would have some impediments. But these are all, in my view, these are all the teething issues which are there in the short term for the cell module players, maybe in the medium term for the polysilicon wafer players. But given the conviction with which the industry is progressing and the government policy support, I'm confident that these will be addressed. But these are largely the investor concerns, and hence, while equity investments have started happening after a lull between 2010-12 to 2020-21, there was at least a 10-11 year gap in which no private equity investments have happened in the sector. And now you have deals trickling in. But of course, the base of the investors in terms of number of investors who are keen to invest is not many. Waaree has raised largely from the HNI pool, but private equity investors also need to step in. We have done a couple of deals with private equity investors with Centrum Capital as an advisor, but that is not adequate. We require more investors, and I really hope that will happen. But right now, there are several concerns across, right from the volatility in the raw price to certain uncertainty that is perceived in the policy by the investors. This is a perception. And more importantly, the execution challenges that one has today. People who have already announced the plans, they all possibly are aware about the execution challenges, specifically when they execute the cell, wafer, and the polysilicon plants.
Thank you, Sunil. Can you also give, some kind of policy interventions that might be required to address some of the concerns that these investors are having?
Yeah, so once the PLI, bidders start setting up the process, so their plans, and the government is honoring that, that itself will give a lot of confidence. But of course, that is maybe a couple of years away. But of course, as I was already mentioning, as far as debt financing is concerned, because of the huge quantities of money that is required to fund these projects, government has to sort of increase the base of lenders. It has to, and maybe some of the large government institutions like PFC have to step in, or government has to encourage the banks, because right now there is no challenge in debt financing, but going forward, you will definitely have a challenge in debt financing because the quantum of investment that is happening in this sector. And this is not a sector which is backed by long-term contracts. Of course, some of the players do have long-term supply contracts now. That is one of the trends, but not for the entire capacity. And even then, there is a certain challenge on the margins that one would have, even with the long-term supply contracts. It is not as easy to fund like that of a renewable IPP, for example, which has a long-term PPA, etc. This is much more dynamic industry. And when it comes to if it is a small size funding, then maybe banks can look at it. But if it is a large plant which requires significant capital, thousands of crores of capital, then today the traditional banks would not understand the dynamics of the sector, and hence there has to be a push from the government, which is today maybe the players don't realize, because today the debt financing is easily available, but going forward that would become a challenge. And of course, about the policy certainty, I think I am of the view that, like Mr. Vivek was saying, next 4 years or so, we would require a PLI support. Then the industry will develop its own strength. The dominance of the Chinese and the sort of pricing power that the Chinese have would decrease with our own capacities coming up in polysilicon and wafer. Their dominance will decrease over the period of time. And the confidence that the investors have to develop in terms of dependence on BCD, which many of them still perceive as a risk. I think government has done its bit in terms of implementing the BCD, and it's the investors who have to take that leap of faith now, given the huge demand that the country has.
Thank you, Sunil, for your insights. Now going back to Vivek sir, again to you. What are the trends that are specifically you're seeing in the cell and wafer manufacturing space in India as of now, and what kind of challenges and issues manufacturers needs to address to be able to pull off this sector?
Okay. In terms of trends, the technology trends, as I mentioned, and your report also talks about, the transition from mono-PERC to TOPCon, N-type, HJT, etc. Those are pretty well established. And each player, depending upon the market they intend to serve and how they are looking at the growth in the market, is addressing that. And some people are trying to also future-proof what they are buying today in terms of equipment. That's the trend, if I can say, at least for the Indian industry. But more importantly, the challenges that will be faced, we have to understand, while most of the manufacturers are pretty well versed in understanding the cell manufacturing, because many, I can speak of at least 3-4 manufacturers who, while procuring cells or even as being part of the supply chain, have had a very deep understanding, knowledge in going, visiting, being there, quality assurance, etc. But there is a difference when you have to deliver that. So the real challenge is going to be in terms of human capital. I mean, if we zero in on that, the talent pool that is available right from the shop floor to supervision to quality manufacturing. Yes, India does have a talent pool and lot wherever the molecules change, chemical process change, mechanical process, but there is an adaptation time. So I think that is going to be the second part, which somebody put in the question box. Yes, availability of Chinese engineers. This is a legacy from the COVID and the geopolitical tensions, but I think the governments are working on it. That will get solved. But more importantly, more than manufacturing, the entire ecosystem of maintenance, periodical upgrades, that is going to be significant. Like in module, we know, and Vineet can talk about it, when people said polysilicon 330, poly 330, that is going to be the mainstay. It just disappeared in 1.5 years. And this is also going to be a critical part about See, unlike the module line where replacement, etc., where the payback is pretty easy, on cell lines, it's not going to be the case. It's almost a 5x investment into that 6x. So one has to be very mindful about how one is playing that game. I think that's another challenge. And last but not the least is how does one stabilize on the quality? Because cell is almost like a bell curve. And one will have to learn very quickly, adapt very quickly to get to that level. So those are the key challenges that I see coming up.
Right, thank you. Vineet, you have anything to add on to the same question on the cell and wafer manufacturing?
I mean, yeah, I mean, so the intent to buy from India, I think, is also a very big factor. Apart from everything aside in terms of pricing, competitiveness, if the intent is there that we want to buy from India, we want to have our own supply chain within India because it has its own advantages. I'm not talking of any support or nationalist feeling or all those things, but definitely having supply chain within the same country for the large manufacturing to develop is going to be critical and in a way very kind of a risk mitigation because of the overall geopolitical scenario around the whole world, wars around and trade policies that keep changing. So in that sense, if there is enough interest from the customer end, when we talk about the developers, when we talk about the end user as a government, then it becomes a collective exercise to grow the supply chain. And then all the questions can be addressed in terms of the challenges of manpower. I don't think we are anywhere behind. It's just that there has not been enough time spent by the industry in this segment in terms of the resources or manpower both. We have been doing a lot of R&D in the pharma, in electronics, and so many other industries. So we just need to take a cue from other industries and take inspiration. We have the rest of the institutes of kind of the leagues of IITs in the whole world, which are like among the best. So in that sense, there is no dearth of technical know-how. Just that there needs to be enough time spent on the whole activity around, and it has to be a multi-pronged approach. We can't have changes in policy. That's what we keep on discussing every year in all the conferences. If there is a continuous or a long-term forecast of the policy and there is not enough changes around, so then the industry can put their head on the execution part and not worrying what will happen after 6 months or a year. So I'm just taking another 1 minute here. So talking about a country like Australia, they know that they can't manufacture, but they want to make sure that the residential market grows. So their thought is clear, and they have a subsidy program which is crystal clear for 2030. Every year they know how much subsidy will be available, and it gets cleared in 2 days or 3 days max, maybe secondary many times. So if that level of clarity is there and consistency in policy implementation, then the industry will grow on its own. It's a market. It's a large economy, so there is not going to be any form of favoritism. It's a merit-based economy already. So market will evolve. The technology development will happen from the industry on its own. So these challenges will definitely meet up once the whole ecosystem is supporting.
Vineet, one more question for you actually. Do you think the existing facilities will be able to, match up to the changes in the new kind of technologies, TOPCon and HJT that we are, hearing in the sector? What is your view on that?
So the existing monopod technologies can be upgraded to TOPCon with some changes in the Tiber Springer. HJT is quite different, so that will take some time, and that is the main reason why the differential cost from TOPCon to an HJT is quite high versus the difference between a monopod to TOPCon. Whatever difference it is going to reduce further, and it will become mainstream in coming times because with the similar level of equipment which the industry has globally, they would be in a better position to upgrade to a TOPCon. So that is going to be a faster implementation. The HJT process needs a very backward level of integration and a whole new set of equipment. So that will take time, and maybe after TOPCon there might be something else which will come up which might be better. So as of now, monopod and TOPCon are the two immediate possibilities on a wider commercial scale.
Right, Vineet. Thank you. Sunil, we have recently, Vineet has mentioned about ALMM issue that is there, policy on the policy certainty part. So with this deferment of 1 year, there is certainly an impact on the manufacturers, and there is, some bit of concerns from the investor side also. What are actual on-ground scenario that you are, from the investors that you are hearing about this specific concern?
I think one deferment is okay, but there are multiple policies that the government has already announced, right from BCD, PLI, LMM, etc. And as you are, in fact, you were asking me earlier that whether we need any more policies. These are very good policies, and it's all, if implemented well by the government, then these are adequate for the sector, even though investors do have perceptions with these policies. But what the government has already announced are good enough for the sector. It's about how they implement it. And of course, the deferment is of a certain concern, but as long as at least they implement it full-fledged after this deferment, this is just a short-term deferment. But in case if they implement it fully, all these policies, and without any surprises, that would give confidence to the investors. This is, of course, a short-term setback, but otherwise, all these policies combined are expected to give a good push for the sector.
Right. Vivek sir, any, key policy interventions do you think, point out, okay, these are the 2-3 things that are required at present to address the short-term concerns of the sector?
So I think the word consistency comes to my mind. And as you rightly pointed out, policies are as good as what is there in implementation. We have some of the best policies, but when it comes to implementation, there seems to be at times either wavering or at times, nitpicking, which is causing some concern. So rightly pointed out, for any investor, if the baseline case is that there is out of that triangle a deterrence mechanism in place, and if it is not there, and most of the investors are not actually worried about the 1 year part of it. They are worried about the rationale used to get that deferment, because numbers do not add up to that. What is the deployment versus what is available, etc. Now the government has come out in support saying that this is the final one. There is going to be none. But as they say, the proof lies in eating the pudding. And that is what is going to be the single biggest test for that. More importantly, is also progressive policies. See, this is a evolving sector. We are actually talking about a sector that is not solar manufacturing. That is an integral part of energy transition. And energy transition is a very new subject for everyone, be it manufacturers, deployment, customers, government. So there has to be a little bit of progressive thought into that. If today PLI for manufacturing of solar modules and the backward integration is important, very soon ancillary industries will be on the radar. And I think the government is already thinking. The think tanks are already talking to the government about doing that, because otherwise the localization component will be an issue. Second part of it is I'm again concerned about the demand. We talked about the utility which dominates India. If you look at countries like Brazil, Australia, US and all that, the rooftop solar, which is the mainstay, actually is not happening, which is the mainstay of distributed solar. So I think when we look at the entire gamut, that is one sector whereby there are pricks that are not going away. In making, whether it is corporate customers, whether it is others. One is the ESG concern that they have to deploy. The other is almost like, I want to be there. That needs to happen. The more important part is also related to the SOPs. When we say sometimes it is treated negatively. See, for the Indian manufacturing to grow, if the SOPs for exports, we have already spoken about for domestic electricity, etc., financing cost. But if the SOPs for export are not there, we would find it very difficult to compete in the global world and miss out on an opportunity. I mean, if I look at the most conservative numbers at the run rate of addition, 100 gigawatt is a market that is open for India. And when we talk about just 2.7 gigawatt exporting, yeah, the numbers say 10x increase over last year, but let's not forget, we are still doing what we would say below in single digits as a percentage of the global share that's available to us. I see this export opportunity in terms of, if I look at policies, the IRA, the Europe and everything, a 3 to 4 year window. In terms of quantity, it's a decade opportunity. It's an opportunity for a decade very clearly. If today we are looking at a run rate of 100, 150, I think in between by 2025, it's going to be 370 gigawatt and about 640 gigawatt between 2025 and 2030. That's a run rate to go from 5,500 deployment to 2,348. That's a kind of, 2,348 to 5,500, which all numbers are talking about, the IEA and the BP outlook. To do that, we have to be ready right now. I think the market is big. And if we miss out on that opportunity, the Indian manufacturing sector would have missed out on a huge, huge opportunity. So those are some of the things we have to proactively think of. While we have to address current concerns like ALMM, consistency and policy, there has to be a futuristic outlook to the entire solar value chain and more importantly, the new energy sector. That would be my take on that.
Right, sir. Thank you. Vineet, we have seen, the bigger players are still focusing, they have some bit of share of their sales to the export market. What about the smaller players? What are the challenges for them to cater to the export market, or that is going to change going forward?
So when we talk about the export opportunity, it is real, it is there for everyone. It's open market again. So like any market, there will be certain quality certifications and acceptance criteria by respective buyers and respective banks who will be funding those projects, whether it is again rooftop, open access, private, public, government, all that. So in that sense, it's open market, the US market as of now, or the European market who are looking outside of China for diversification. So there is definitely interest to buy from India outside of China. There has been investigation going on around the Southeast Asian country supplies and their origins from China and things like that. So definitely the export opportunity from India for these developed nations is huge. Having said that, because the development in the Indian market itself is so big, and because of this sudden rise in exports from all the large manufacturers, so in fact it has become a small opportunity window for the the smaller compared to the giants, the smaller companies like us to get into the developers and work together, where the larger manufacturers, obviously for the bottom line reasons, there would be a focus on export because we get better pricing, better margins there. So the developers are looking at adding more suppliers in their supply chain. So it's an opportunity for the smaller players to engage with the larger customers and then work together on various formats. Even we are discussing, all the other companies are discussing. There has to be certain consensus around the way of working and making sure that the manufacturers earn a little bit out of this whole exercise rather than just taking more liabilities. So in that sense, there is an opportunity for both India and export. And because the overall market is developing and growing, and there is a keen interest on buying outside of China, so that has a direct advantage on every manufacturer who has been there for the last say 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years in the industry. Yeah.
Thank you, Vineet. So if I ask, by when India will be self-reliant, if I want to put that number to that, 2026, 27, as per your understanding of the market, Vivek sir.
I'll have to get into the definition of self-reliant, and that's
If I say 70% self-reliant.
Yeah, no, that is achievable. But as I said again, now to look at the dictionary meaning of self-reliant itself has changed. So in a global economy, if one has to look at that way, one will say the primary material which go into that, when will India start mining them? So I think in terms of self-reliance, which means that you have de-risked the supply chain and that you have a good diversity of supply chains and everything, that is 2 to 3 years on the anvil.
All right. So I
would
think
like to add here to what Mr. Vivek was saying. When you say self-reliance, it may be a long way before we have self-reliance in the entire value chain, but we are definitely rapidly progressing towards it. As Mr. Vivek was mentioning, we had only a 5% share in the module sale within India. Now that 5% will, obviously, all of you will see the next 2 years will grow by leaps and bounds. And the same will happen definitely on the cells as well, both modules and cells. And slowly, and of course, wafers and polysilicon, it will take some more time, but we are rapidly progressing. So we can talk about self-reliance first in the modules, which we are going to achieve definitely. I think Mr. Vivek and Vineet will agree with me. And going forward, it will be, we'll be halfway through with the cells in the next 2-3 years, and then progressively into the other parts of the value chain.
Right, Sunil. Thank you. I think we are, reaching on time to the scheduled time for the webinar now. So Vibhuti, if you have any concluding remarks, anything to.
It was so wonderful to hear from all the three of you, and it looks like a very promising landscape with not only India leapfrogging in developing its own technology, adopting, given China is one of the big players. So we are looking at China from, where as far as technology is concerned as well. But I think more importantly, looks like not only the big players, but also the small players are looking at export, which again, given, huge RE targets that have been set globally by so many different countries, there can be further exponential growth, and investment will not be a challenge if we have the right policies in place, if we have the right set of new players who are coming in while intent is there. I think finance will not be a challenge going forward. So on this positive note, I think thanks all for being there.
Clearly, absolutely right what you're sharing. And with this, I think let's conclude this session. Thank you to all the panelists for sharing these wonderful insights. And the recording of the session will be available on our website shortly. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.